welcome to the Stronger Things podcast. This is episode 2. I'm Kevin, and I'm here again with Sophia.
I thought you were going to say Grumpy Cat first.
And Grumpy Cat, that's right. And this time we obviously nailed podcast number 1 because now we have a super cool guest for podcast number 2. We have Liefia Ingalls, who is an American professional strongwoman.
I'm super cool?
Yeah, you are. I've met you. You're super cool. I know you don't think so, but in a quirky kind of way.
Yeah.
and the reason that I wanted to talk to you, Liefia, apart from that, you know, your phenomenal physical talents, achievements, and attributes, is that obviously one of the things that we want to drive home on this podcast is the importance of technical precision and training mechanics and how that applies to athleticism. Mm-hmm. Because I've been out and I've trained with you. I went to East Coast, West Coast, and we trained a little bit together. And obviously the thing that struck me the most was how technically precise you were compared to some other competitive athletes that I've met who just tend to muscle through everything. So what brought you to the point that made you being different from everybody else?
Well, I think it was a gradual evolution. Because I know that when I started in Strongman, I didn't view it as a very technical sport either. Mm-hmm. I got my start in competition after I had already started training. I was pretty involved with CrossFit as an athlete and competing, and that's kind of where I got my start in training. And that's kind of the environment that sort of bred me to start to look into more technical aspects of training. And so I was already kind of having that mindset as a professional when I got into Strongman, although my allure to Strongman was just the extremity. It was just this is ridiculous and cool and I want to do it. But because I had that sort of an outlook, I think, as soon as I got into competing, my immediate reaction to everything that I was learning was okay, how can I make this better? Or how can I utilize how can I utilize some ingenuity or some precision or something like that to make this a little bit better. I think that was just kind of my natural mindset to things is problem solving, but it was kind of ripe, I think, in Strongman because of just the history and, it's not a young sport necessarily, but it's still quite immature, from that technical standpoint. So there was a lot of, I think, ripeness for someone to come in and start doing some of that. Not that I was the first one at all. But at least for, at the time when it was growing pretty rapidly at that level.
So do you think that the technical aspects have only come in now because you've said it's a relatively new sport, but it's actually relatively new in terms of the fact that there's set events that you can prepare yourself for, right?
Yeah. With Strongman, as most people know it, most people know Strongman as the Giants. Mm-hmm. Right? They know, World's Strongest Man era, 80s, 90s, early 2000s. And then, the more recent, World's Strongest Man competitors, you're looking at guys that are close to 7 feet tall, over 400 pounds. They are massive giants. And that's still what most people think of when they think of Strongman. So the Strongman as a whole sport has been around for quite a while. But Strongman competition at the scaled levels, so for amateur levels and lighter weight classes and women's classes, that's where it's more recent. And that's where the rise of the technical athletes come from, I think, because, it has to do with the smaller competitors being involved and the women being involved, because we know we don't have that to rely on. The old mindset in Strongman is you have to be a giant and you just have to be massive and statically strong and super sturdy. And the barrier to entry was so high because of that if you weren't physically capable or physically gifted, you just wouldn't make it in. And those people are so big and so powerful on their own that they're getting really far without needing to think about all of that stuff. Mm-hmm. So with the emergence of the smaller weight classes and this greater variety of participation, that's where this new opportunity for advantage comes in.
Okay. So when you started focusing on technicalities, what did you start focusing on first? To know that you would get better at using tech? What was your main focus at first?
So my main focus was just building static strength. And some of that was, so in the beginning of my competitive career, some of that was misguided as well, I think. yes, there's a factor that like you do need to build a lot of base strength, and you do need to build a lot of like tissue integrity. So you need to come in with some baseline of strength. But I also still was meeting a lot of that. Like when I first got involved in competition, the general, or even just training and talking to other competitors, like the general attitude was like, you just have to be bigger. Like everyone just has to be bigger, and you just have to be stronger. And, the technique and stuff isn't that important. Just get bigger, just get bigger. So when I first got started, that was kind of like what drove me. I was like, okay, I can be technical, but it doesn't have to be like my primary, it's not necessarily my primary objective. My primary objective is like, I got to get big and muscly and be strong. And so I went into that, and I definitely faltered. I definitely suffered some pretty severe injuries. Luckily, well, I don't know if it's luckily, or whatever. But most of my worst injuries were pre-strongman days, in my CrossFit days. But I had, and once I started looking at strongman, I had to take a lot of accountability for like how I was training. So that really helped. That made me focus more internally. That was really kind of what helped me accelerate the focus on technical drive, because I was like, well, if I just keep doing what everyone else is doing, and I just keep focusing everything on like, how can I add more volume to my training, and how can I just get bigger and stronger incessantly without any other improvement, I'm going to get hurt, or I'm not going to last very long. Mm-hmm. So it was the big, like I always had some technical focus, but it wasn't my primary objective until I got a pretty serious injury. And I saw the likelihood of like a career-ending injury, and possibly like a life-changing injury. And like dealing with the effects of that. And that was kind of like the wake-up call. That was my gift of injury. That was like, hey, this is really how important this is. And that kind of made me go back to the beginning and say, okay, figuring out how to build technical proficiency in everything I'm doing is gonna increase my longevity. And then by default, the longer amount of time I have to be here and to train, the more skills I can accumulate, and the more consistent I'll be.
Yeah, I think it's super important, right? This technique thing, because you're talking about athletic longevity, but also there's a lot of people that are coming in to train strongman now because they're attracted to it or interested in it because of lighter weight classes and ladies doing it that make it more accessible, and they don't want to be athletes. They're just doing it because it's fun. So yeah. It's more important even so for them as well, because they're looking for lifelong fitness longevity and not just athletic longevity. So I think this technique thing is super, super important.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, especially because, and that's the case for myself. I train a lot of clients in strongman, and the majority of them are not high-level athletes, and they're not even intending to become high-level athletes. They're just partaking in a sport that's fun, right? They're taking on a hobby. They want to be able to go to the contest with their friends and have fun. They want to be able to play with the implements. They want to be able to challenge and push themselves, but they've got a 9-to-5 job. They've got families. They've got all of these other concerns that mean that their risk to reward ratio is going to be, completely inverse of what athletes can get away with.
Yeah. And I think as well, something that you mentioned there too is that, you were getting injured because you were kind of following the same program as everyone else, which is something that's very CrossFit to do, irrespective of what your goals are or your training age or your chronological age, we're going to give you the same training program. But obviously you've begun to individualize your training, which is something that's important, because I know, like you said, that you have clients that you train. So obviously you believe that apart from technical proficiency, that training has to be individualized and not generalized.
Yeah. I think that most people that have spent some time with training clients in real life can attest to that fact, that there's some amount of generalization that is applicable to everyone, but at some point, like, everyone's needs are going to change, right? And there's so many factors that go into that. It's not just physical abilities and weaknesses. It's also, lifestyle factors and long-term goals, and, how much risk they're willing to put up with versus, what the rest of their day looks like. So I think that, that customizable foundation, like, unfortunately, there has to be some sort of negotiation with that, in training environments, in gyms, in group classes, and in things like that, where you can only get away with so much, conversation and maximize the amount of time you can spend with people versus like what they're willing to pay for, things like that. The business considerations make that difficult. But, if we're just talking about like what's the best quality training and the best outcome for athletes, it's always going to be custom.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as well, like, one thing I see, and it's makes me a little bit sad, is, like, obviously I can see how much technical precision is going into what you're doing, but now we see a huge amount of gyms that are thinking, okay, we need to diversify product to make more money and have more revenue. All right, let's add a strongman program. And then they're just buying a couple of old worn out tires and a stone mold, and then all of a sudden now they've got a strongman class.
Yeah.
Right? And that's crazy, right?
Yeah, it is. And I mean, and CrossFit's a good analog of that, because if we look at like the evolution that they took, it gets diluted really quickly. And you end up with like very marginal amounts of understanding, or either of that technical proficiency or of the scalability. So I've seen a lot of those, like you're talking about, the sort of like backyard gym, and everyone's like, oh, people are into strongman, so let's add strongman stuff. And I've encountered those people that have either trained in those programs, or some people that are trying to train others with those programs. And what ends up happening is their understanding of the implements only applies to like the base level of scalability, right? So like you said, they get a tire, they get a stone. So they're using a tire that weighs 150 pounds, or they're using a stone that weighs 70 pounds. They're using implements that the intensity of those implements don't mimic strongman events at all, right? And so they've developed techniques for using those implements, or, for using them in training, sort of like by trial and error, right? Or by, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but they're looking at the movements and saying, oh, well, this, like the tire flip, for example, people are like, oh, it looks like a deadlift. So, and the tire weighs 150 pounds and I can deadlift 150 pounds, so it must be done like a deadlift. Yeah. And that works until the tire crosses a threshold to where it becomes, a different type of movement. It's too heavy now, right? And then, so they're learning it one way, but those methods aren't scalable to the intensity that actually matches what's in the real sport.
Right, so that comes down again to motor pattern kind of thing, right? So like they developed a motor pattern in one way, then that motor pattern falls apart later because it doesn't apply in a general or specific sense, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think as well, one thing that strikes me is not just the not just the, like that, but also the fact that they're not respecting the heritage or the meaning really of strongman, because you weren't really supposed to take a 95-pound Atlas stone and do 30 clean and jerks for time with it, right? But that's what happens, right?
Yeah. Well, that's an argument we have in strongman community all the time as well, right? It's been an argument since the creation of women's division, since the creation of lightweight division, because if that's what you're saying, the spirit of strongman, or like the essence of what it was like, who is the biggest, the strongest. So like, even in the beginning of that dilution, where they said like, okay, let's open up participation for more classes, like there was a lot of people that pushed against that said like, no, like we can't have lighter weight classes, like there's no point, it's just strongest is the strongest and that's it. So there's like I think a lot of negotiation that goes into that, because even in the community there's some push and pull where it's like, yes, the original spirit is that it should be heavy, it should be difficult, it should be an absolute contest of strength and freakish ability, but you need to be able to scale it to some amount that still, it still creates involvement. There still needs to be a little bit enough scalability that people can approach it and people can take interest. But I think the way to maintain that at the same time is to kind of put in some sort of safeguard where like, that's where like the technical emphasis comes in, right? Where it's like you can have, or like, I guess what I'm thinking about this is that, what I've decided is that I think strongman can be for everybody, but competition isn't.
Yes.
Right. And the same thing with other sports and things like that. If you want to play a sport, there's a lot of avenues for you to try it, to learn it, and the emphasis is always going to be on developing that technical proficiency and managing your risk. But if you want to compete, then you cross the threshold, and on that other side, there's a whole different list of negotiations that you make, because it's a different objective.
Yeah, but I think a lot of people that come into things from like a CrossFit type background, they get confused with that objective, right? Because they're literally used to competing every time they walk in the gym, right? And viewing that as a competition. rather than anything else. And that's why, I mean, you mentioned that you had more injuries when you were doing that, and it's the fact that, you know, in competition or performance, the injury rate and the injury risk is much higher than it is in a training scenario, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what would you think about, so if someone wanted to come in and start doing strongman, do you think that it's necessary for them to build a base level of strength that they should be in possession of before trying to do strongman movements?
Yes. I think that exists, though, because of the nature of the implements. You know, whether or not that's going to stay the same forever, but there does exist a reality that, like, even the smallest or lightest implements in strongman still have a base weight that's not infinitely scalable. So depending on that person's relative size and strength, there's going to be, like, you know, there's going to be a line that says, like, you have to be this strong before you can touch this thing. But some people are going to already have that, right? So, like, if it's a relatively large athlete with some athletic background, you know, maybe they're not technically proficient. They're strong enough to use the implement, but that doesn't matter, right? So in their case, then there's a limiting factor for technical proficiency, which is, like, you know, and this is, like, in my personal case with, like, my clients or people that I would train, like, there needs to be some minimum level of technical proficiency. Like, you need to be able to know how to use your body, right? And this is not just for strongman, this is for any sport, because in order to become proficient, you need to be coachable. And in order to be coachable, you need to have basic control over your body systems, right? You know, basic control of your mechanics. So, like, when you got people that are brand new to lifting, right, and they don't know how to, you know, they don't know how to hinge properly, they don't know how to squat properly, they don't know how to manifest internal cues when they move their body, those people aren't going to be able to understand and process the stuff you're telling them with this much more difficult to use implement, you know. So those people need to start with barbell training, with, you know, basic functional movement, and learning how to master that to some degree first.
So if there's somebody who's, like, on the streets who decides, like, they want to get stronger and they decide that strongman is, like, the sport for them, where would you send them, or, like, what would be the best for them to do to get those good movement patterns and to make sure that they're making those foundations secure instead of building bad habits, like, right from the start?
Yeah, well, that's also kind of a hard thing to answer in strongman, because we don't have, you know, like a universal system or a agreed system of gyms or communities. So one thing about myself or with strongman is that the community is really well connected. So, like, if I personally did come across someone in the street that was like, hey, I want to do it, you know, okay, where do you live? Where are you at? I'll talk to people, you know, put you in touch with someone. Or there's, you know, there is some stuff that's available online, but there's not a lot. You know, like, I do my business all online, but that only goes so far. There are cases where people are too new, or, you know, they're lacking that basic, like, motor coordination. And in that case, like, you really need someone to teach you that in person. So yeah, that's actually it's a really hard question to answer. Right now, it just kind of exists where if someone's like, I want to try strongman, where do I go? You just have to find someone who's already in it. Mm-hmm. The lucky thing about that, though, is that now that everyone's literally connected, you know, 35 ways sideways on the internet, it's like, oh, okay, you just have to find someone that does it. Okay, here, let me send you 10 names, and you can contact those people and, you know, usually find it. And because strongman is a little bit, I wouldn't say that we're, like, you know, really obscure, but we're not very, like, mainstream community. Everyone in the community is like, yes, please let me show you all about my sport. Like, I want to help you. So most people are really, really, you know, really open-minded about, like, incorporating people.
Yeah, that's one thing that I found definitely anytime I visited a strongman gym was how welcoming everybody was, and nobody was judgmental of the fact, you know, that I don't weigh 400 pounds, and, you know, right? It was everybody was super happy to share knowledge with me, including yourself, and spend time, and that was great. And that's one thing that definitely attracts me to strongman and strength sports, is that sense of camaraderie and community. Yeah. So in terms of your training, you're training for a competition right now, right?
Well, I'm technically done training. Now I'm just eating a lot.
Nice.
Okay, so what's the competition?
I'll be competing at the official Strongman Games, which is going to be World's Strongest Woman for me. But they'll also be contesting World's Strongest Woman and World's Strongest Man at the same time.
Okay, awesome. And when is that going to be? That's very soon, right?
It's very soon. So I don't know. I don't know if it'll already have happened by the time this goes on to the event, but it is next weekend. I'll be competing Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
Where is it?
I forgot the dates. What are the dates next weekend?
The next weekend is like the 8th and the 9th.
Yeah, the 8th and the 9th.
So December 7th, 8th, and 9th.
Okay.
It's going to be in North Carolina, in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Okay.
Oh, uh-oh. Am I still here?
Yeah, you're still there. You're still there.
Okay. I did something I'm just going to stop.
And have you competed in this competition before?
Yes. So this will be my third World's Strongest Woman.
Okay, awesome.
Competition.
And does that have a weight class?
So now it does. The first World's Strongest Woman that I did in 2016 was an open class. So I competed against everyone. And because it was open, it was still mostly heavyweight competitors. And then last year was the first, so Official Strongman Games is more or less a new federation. It's a new branch that's attempting to take the World's Strongest Woman and the World's Strongest Man titles and break them up into weight classes so they can increase participation. So now, last year, it was the first year that they had a class segmented World's Strongest Woman. So I competed last year in the middleweight category, and then I'll be back again. I'm a middleweight again this year.
Yeah.
So what kind of events do you have to do within those competitions, or what? Or do they change from year to year?
So yeah, they change every time, and in general, so people in Strongman don't like this, but the CrossFit competition, the way that CrossFit competitions are run, it's very analogous to Strongman, right? There's very much a component of trying to test all the different modalities and stuff like that, except we don't focus on all the different energy systems, right? Everything's short and fast and everything's really heavy. But you'll see a lot of variety in the events at each competition. And you'll see, so in general, you can usually count on some kind of pressing event, some type of loading event, something to carry and run. Sometimes there's throwing, sometimes there's dragging, there's all sorts of different combinations. But in general, the people that promote the competitions try to make it so that, each event covers a slightly different, a different skill or a slightly different, mechanical modality, so that the winners end up being the more or less most well-rounded in terms of strength and capability.
And how far in advance do you get to find out what the events are? Do you know already what you're going to be doing next week?
I know exactly what I'm going to be doing next week. So that depends on the competition. So sometimes you'll get really advanced notice. So I've had competitions where I knew the events 4 months in advance.
Wow.
And sometimes you get less notice. But in general, 6 to 8 weeks is usually standard. So you have enough time to practice the events, to anticipate your strategy and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And how much weight are you having to put on before this competition? That's quite a lot, right?
Well, so I don't have to. There's no minimum weight requirement.
Right. Okay.
But yeah, so I compete in the middleweight class, which for women's strongman we have lightweights under 140 pounds, middles under 180 pounds, and then open, which is above. So I compete in the middleweight class of 140 to 180 pounds. In strongman, as in other strength sports, typically the better competitors are at the top or even above their weight class limit, on competition day, and utilize cutting and stuff like that. So I have, for the majority of my career, been undersized for that class. So right now, even I'm trying to get as heavy as I can, but I'm weighing just under 170. And so my goal is to try and get as close to that 180 mark as I can by competition day. But
again, that brings everything back to the technique, right? So you've been able to win multiple competitions whilst not being at the top of the weight class, right?
Yeah.
And that's where your technical proficiency has come in over and above everybody else.
Yeah, I think it's really been, that's really kind of the asset, because it's obvious that now I have a lot of strength, right? But it's taken me many years to get there. But, in that time, and even now, I compete against a lot of competitors who are physically much larger, statically much stronger.
Mm-hmm.
My power lifts or, my static lifts are compared to most of my competitors. So, I think that's really the big asset or the big difference, when people ask, like, well, how are you able to beat so many people that are bigger and stronger than you? It's the technical proficiency is there. And it's not just because I think that the technical proficiency helps me perform better in the events, but the technical proficiency is what is consistency. Mm-hmm. That is really the prize winner in Strongman, because it's not, even despite the fact that we know what all of the events are going to be, we know exactly what they're going to look like. We don't use standardized equipment, where, my log that I train on is going to be different from the one at the contest, is going to be different from the one that someone else trained on. So there's a lot of variation and a lot of surprises that go in. And the best way to handle all of that over time is to be really consistent with how you approach your performance. And the technical proficiency is the foundation of that.
Yeah.
So whenever you focus on like working on technique, is it ever something that evolves over time? Like as you become stronger and find how your body works, like I assume your technique when you first started is much different than it was now. And are you constantly like adjusting to new techniques or something that's even more efficient? Like, are you ever finding new techniques that are better and like safer?
Oh yeah, especially because of the sheer volume of different events that we do. Mm-hmm. And, so like me as an example, I compete typically like 3 to 4 big competitions in a year. Mm-hmm. You break down the time, okay, let's say that those are evenly spaced. That's one competition every 3 months. That's only 12 weeks to prepare for a contest. I would say typically 8 is the minimum that you need to feel really technically proficient with all of those events. So what you're looking at is, you're training for one competition, you're doing 8 to 12 weeks worth of preparation for that competition, and then you turn around and you're switching to a whole new set of events. So the amount of time that you're, some of those skills that like underline, so for example, like pressing, like I use a lot of like push press or push jerk techniques, like those are always going to be the same, and just the implement changes. So, like the heart of those movements I can keep working on over and over and over, but you don't actually have enough time to just continuously develop a skill. It's like you develop a skill in one implement for a couple months, and then you put that skill on hold, and then you switch to another skill for a few months. And then maybe in a couple months, or the following year, you get to switch back to that skill and come back to it. So all of our skills and all the different implements are always in progress. Mm-hmm.
All right. And what was...
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Go.
I was going to say, like, in terms of skills, like, so what do you think's your strongest events?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, our favorite event.
My favorite event. So my favorite event is, that's actually getting hard because it's different. My favorite events are usually the ones that I'm not good at. They're the ones that get more exciting, right? Mm-hmm. So, but that relationship totally changes. So like right now, for example, we have a throwing event in this contest. And 2 months ago, I was like, this is such a stupid event. I hate this event. I don't want to do this. That was my least favorite. But in terms of like, now I'm getting ready, like, I don't know if I'm going to excel at that event, but that's the event that I'm most looking forward to, because that's the one with the most excitement, the most risk, the most like, I'm not sure if it's going to work. That's really exciting to me. So, like for me, it's the pursuit of the challenge, the pursuit of problem solving, of like, I've spent the last 2 months putting in all this work on throwing, like studying videos of Highland gamers and people doing these types of throws, and like trying to figure out like how to make my body do that thing that I'm not experienced at. So the excitement of that is like, wow, like, I hope it works, In terms of like actual proficiency, like I think my best events are probably pressing and stone loading.
Yeah, so you hold world records in both of those things, right?
I do, right? So that's why I think that one earns best. But
and you said it was stone rolling or
stone loading?
Stone loading.
That's like, yeah, that's the one that everyone knows. You pick up the big rocks and put them on stuff. Yeah.
And that's what you started with, right? Like when you started training, is that what you began with, or
starting like loading stones, like Atlas stones, or yeah, just much smaller ones when I started. Mm-hmm. So I think like when I did my first Strongman contest, I made my own stones in my yard because I needed some to train with, and like I think the first stone I made was like 90 pounds, and I remember thinking like I was like, that's okay, like I don't know if I want to do heavier than that. I don't know if I can lift it. So like the first stone I made was 90 pounds. And then in the first competition I did, we lifted a stone that was 185 pounds, and then the 335.
And that's a world record, right?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. But I think it will come down soon. There's a lot of really promising people out there.
Yeah, and I mean, you were saying like the first thing that you picked up when you were doing strongman was these stones, and I mean, I've been traveling a lot, as you know, and I go to lots of different gyms, and I see people now opening up gyms that are maybe only doing strongman, or CrossFit gyms that are offering strongman, and what we've got is people that are coming in and attending like strongman class, like in a group general setting, right? And then they're being told like, okay, now you can pick up an Atlas stone, which, like, to my opinion, is wrong and weird, because you can't really pick up a stone without being in spinal flexion, right? Which I think for general population is maybe a bit dangerous. So, like, what do you think about that? Like, obviously, we've said before that if people want to come in and access strongman, that they should probably work on getting a little bit stronger. But obviously, we got a lot of coaches that want to listen to this too, and I want to be like, well, you know, obviously, looking from an athlete's side, you want to get stronger. But what about from a coach's side? You know, should we really be giving Atlas stones to novices?
Well, I think that, for one, I think that the argument that spinal flexion is bad is not totally accurate. You know, it's like no movement should be demonized, right? It's like the movement itself is not bad. Like there's no bad movement. There's improperly prepared movement, right? So like so to say that like, oh, like that movement shouldn't be done because of flexion, that's too big, right? And that's too premature, right? That's not the case. It's that certain people shouldn't perform flexion because they're not prepared to handle it. So you're correct, I think, in saying that like not everyone should start right away. That's where that base movement comes in, right? So like if we look at, okay, spinal flexion's not evil, but in order to lift under load in that position, there's a certain amount of control that a person needs to be able to have, you know, and a certain amount of stability they need to be able to have in neutral first, right? So if that person doesn't meet that first baseline, then, you know, we're not teaching this person to load in spinal flexion or spinal extension if they don't know how to brace neutral first, right?
Yeah, I agree. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's all about how to protect people, right? Sorry.
I like your cat, your grumpy cat.
Yeah, grumpy cat. I was hoping that you were going to bring mini Burke Ulis. It's like a little R2-D2 model, because Grumpy Cat was desperate to meet him.
I could get him. You want me to bring him? Hold on. I'll get him.
Oh, man. And how many? She has 5 world records?
I think so, yeah.
Wow.
Amazing, right?
Yeah, that's incredible. And he's
a little fucked up in his legs. On the last trip, he had to go in a backpack, so like his legs are all swirly.
But Mini Burke Uli is Instagram famous.
Busy. Yeah, he is.
Yeah, where was he? Rome?
Yeah, we went to Rome.
I saw pictures of him at the Trevi Fountain. Right.
Yeah, it was really cool. We went to Rome and Germany. Yeah, it was actually pretty funny. I think I took him because, you know, we're full-size Burke couldn't go, and I was like, well, I'll just, you know, bring him so that they can have company. It's actually pretty cool.
So and full-size Burke is also pretty strong, right? Full-size Burke is 3 times California's strongest man, right?
Yes, he's 3 times California's strongest man. He's placed very high, you know, finals competitor at like the Arnold Amateur. So he's trying to make his way either to, you know, to the pro division, or I think he's got his sights set on moving up and just becoming an even bigger Burke.
Wow.
So we'll see.
Scary.
He's quite cool. And I don't tell him very much out loud, but he's a more proficient athlete than I am. I think, you know, he's got a little bit more of the gift than I do. So
and
you know,
so
he's pretty awesome.
obviously you were talking about like how you were developing coaching and I saw your technique and changes over time and you refine things. Is he a major influence on that? Is he coaching you?
Not exactly. We can't train together very easily because that's a thing. I haven't met very many spouses that can train together, and if I do, then I feel like I don't trust them. Exactly. Yes. I mean, he was a huge influence on me at the beginning of my strongman career, and still now. Mostly for like mindset. Like the biggest thing with him was like he was the person that taught me how to live my lifestyle as an athlete, right? Mm-hmm. That not like taking into account all of the other factors, because that's a huge piece. Like everyone's focus goes immediately first on like, okay, well, what's the training and what's the outcome and what's the volume. And, that's a really important part to start with. But like once that part is managed, like 70% of all the other effort is like how you eat and how you sleep and how you think about competition. And he was the one that really kind of pushed me into like a whole new mindset, like the athlete. And that's really, really helpful. And he's doing a lot now. Like he doesn't train or coach people as much. He's not as much into the interpersonal contact, but he does have a lot of information. Like we've developed a lot of techniques and stuff together. We've been working a lot together on trying to like articulate and package a lot of stuff that we do in training and how we can get it out to other people. He's been a really big part in that for me. Like we started doing a lot of seminars, the Unicorn Strength Training seminars, and he's helping me quite a bit with that. And he's got a lot of plans of his own too. So he's kind of, I think, just developing his place right now in terms of like how he wants to broadcast that information that he has.
Yeah, and so, I mean, I know you guys do a lot of seminars all over the place, right? And is that just because you want to give something back to the sport of strongman, help to support the people that are coming up? What's your motivation for doing that? All of those?
Yeah, I mean, just to get it out there. So the one thing is too is that like, just to connect with more people that are doing this and to get that information out there, because the way we see it is, this information is not like, some of it's difficult. You have to learn it, but it's not out of reach, right? The technicality and the consistency and the mindset is what puts that impossible stuff in reach of normal people, right? It's the link between the average person and the elite athlete, right? And more people should have access to it, and it's the same way with a lot of strength sports, and obviously it's growing and the internet is helping, but what we see in strongman is that a lot of the information has been hidden, or it's been closeted, or it's been saved, like the information exists, but it's only in these like far reaching pockets, and there's a lot of people that want it, so we're trying to get it out there and try to like get in contact with people and just share it. And it helps that we also personally love traveling. It's like our favorite pastime, and love meeting other people that think strongman is cool. So it's just a perfect link up of those things. But and that's entirely the motivation, because we also like, I don't make any money doing them. So, like we charge money, but the cost of getting to these people and staying there and doing it is usually way higher than what we can charge them anyways.
That's exactly what I said to Sophia before you came on, was that it's the same thing. I'm traveling and doing seminars. I don't make any profit. I think people don't realize that. Flights and hotels and right, it's all just for the trying to share knowledge thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the thing, the difficulty of that for me, you probably, I think, can relate, is that it's because there's not, like, there's a market for it, because people will benefit from the information, but most people don't know that they need it, or they don't know that it exists. So that's like a really hard part too, where, for example, that goes into the cost factor, because it is really expensive to go across the world and stay for 3 days and teach a workshop to people. But if you charge too much, people are like, oh, I don't need that, because they're conditioned to think, either because of the small, like the exposure they've had to these, these marginal weekend classes or whatever, that there's no difference between the information they're getting down the street and the information that we're bringing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think it can also be the coach's thing, or maybe the owner of the gym. I think because there's so many gyms now and it's very competitive, I think they're afraid to say that they don't know everything, or maybe that if they have a specialist come in, that it'll be like egg on their face, and they might be embarrassed that more than they do, right? So it's tricky to deal with that ego thing.
Mm-hmm.
The ego exists everywhere, but
definitely.
It's also a piece that in strength sports in general, because yes, there's participation from all ages and all sexes and all of that stuff, but there's in general, like, a lot of the figureheads of the strength community are still old guys that are kind of like set in their ways, and ego has been historically a huge motivator or a huge piece to their success. So there's a lot of people that are like, no, I don't want anyone else in my space,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's difficult that, and you're right. People think if they buy a pair of $150 lifting shoes, it will help their lifting, but they don't see the connection with good quality information helping their lifting as much.
Yeah,
I guess it's not something that you can wear that looks shiny and brand new that people will be impressed with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, isn't that the human condition anyway? It's like, buying shoes is a quick fix.
Yeah.
But listening and trying and reshaping yourself and failing and then learning again, and it's frustrating and it's difficult.
Yeah, and it takes. I think it does take a certain type of person to do that, and those are the people that excel in sports, like yourself, that just keep plugging away, right? So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So if anybody wanted to get in contact with you or learn more, because you do programming, right?
Yeah. So I do. I have a website. It's unicornstrength.com.
Unicorn Strength. Okay.
I mean, Instagram also, but it can be harder to find me because my name is strange to spell. But it's Liefia, Liefiesaurus, like a dinosaur.
Yeah. And you have a Unicorn Strength Training Instagram as well, right?
Say that again?
You have also Unicorn Strength Training on Instagram?
Yeah, so the other account is also Unicorn Strength Training. It's also on Instagram. So the personal account is a good way to actually get hold of me, or if you want information about me. The Unicorn Strength Training page, I try to focus that on my clients and what they're doing.
Okay. Awesome.
But that'll be for educational content, hopefully, soon.
Yeah, so you're going to put up some YouTubes and things like that?
Yeah, I think, at least for me personally, I've had, a lot of focus has been on my personal clients because that's where my income comes from.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to branch out and start spending some time on producing some like free educational content. Because right now it is difficult because I do want to just spread the knowledge. Like if I didn't need a job, I would totally coach everyone for free and make all the content, but you can't. Yeah. So I'm trying to find the balance between, working less for money and working a little bit more just for content to try and get more information out. Because, it's hard to do it. It's easy to do it on a one-on-one basis, but it's very slow.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Cool. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, that's it. That was fast. Actually, not really.
Well, we spent like 45 minutes, yeah.
Okay, cool.
All right, thanks very much for chatting to us. And
have an awesome time at that competition.
Oh, thank you. I think I'll have plenty good time.